Love is the foundation of the Christian life. If you're just going to narrow down the Christian life to one thing, you have to narrow it down to love. And you're designed for love. You're created for love. You're designed to be known. You're desired to be understood. You have this in you. It's just part of who you are. And there's a lot of things that you can say about Christianity, and there's a lot of things that are written and a lot of things that have said about Christianity, and some of them are actually true. Most of them are not. But at the very center of Christianity is this whole idea of love. Now, love is difficult. And love is difficult, I think, for a couple of reasons. I think the primary love is difficult is that you are a wonderfully complex being. And I am a wonderfully complex being. And the psalmist writes about that and says, hey, this is, you are wonderfully and complex, and I've knitted you in the womb, and this is who you are. And so you are wonderfully complex. And since you are wonderfully complex, you are hard to love. And since I am wonderfully complex, I'm hard to love. There's another thing that makes love really, really difficult. And the other thing that makes love really difficult is how do we define it? Because there's so many different definitions for the word love. Love comes at us in all kinds of ways, and there's all kinds of definitions. Now, here's one of the primary places that we get our definition from love from. We get it from the culture that we live in. So we think we define love based on the music that we listen to, and the movies that we watch, and the stories that we read, the commercials that we see. And it's not like you're consciously driving down listening to music going, oh, this is exactly how I define love. I am allowing, culture to define how I view love. You do it subconsciously. But there's so many things in our culture that are defining love for us. Another way that we define love is sometimes we'll let the government define love for us. Well, what does the government say love is? But here's one that's really defining. My emotions. I will allow my emotions to define what love is. And if I feel love and if I feel something, so that's what love is. Or if I don't feel love or I don't feel something, then that's what it's not. Now, your emotions are real. And at any given point in your life, your emotions may be the most real thing in your life. But your emotions cannot be trusted. Your emotions are to be managed. Your emotions are not to be followed. You certainly can't trust them. Here's another way that we'll define love. We'll define love by our experiences. And so if I've experienced something and it's like, okay, this makes me feel good and I like this experience, so I'll begin to define love that way. So the fact that I'm wonderfully complex and the fact that you're wonderfully complex and the fact that we've got so many different definitions of love hitting at us and coming at us from all different angles, then it makes loving very difficult. But we can't get past the fact that we're designed for love, and we can't get past the fact that I need love and I want to be loved, I want to give it, and I want to receive it. So one of the things that we need to do as we've gathered in a place that we call church is, what does the scripture say about it? How does the Bible define love? That would be a really important question. Specifically, what does the life of Jesus look like? How did he live his life in love? And I tell you, you want to know somebody you want to guess who the most misquoted person to ever live is? Jesus. Jesus is the most misquoted person to ever live, and especially when it comes to love. And people will just throw out stuff. You gotta read the whole thing, and you gotta read it from start to finish, and you gotta see what is his life like. And then what did the church leaders say about it? When we look at people like James and John and Paul, when he talks about love, when they define love, how do they define it? We've got some foundational scriptures that we're using in this series that we're in called Design for Love, where we're really looking at some practical ways that we can love each other. And one of those foundational scriptures is found in John chapter 13, verse 34. And this is the apostle. Jesus is talking to his 12 apostles. And he says, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. I'm giving you a new commandment. And they knew all about commandments. They were Jews. They had all kinds of commandments that were part of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the temple and all of these they had rules upon rules. They had rules about rules. And Jesus is coming in and saying, listen, I'm going to give you a new commandment. And that new commandment is that you want to love one another. And I'm telling you to love. As I have loved you, love one another. 1 John 4:16, another foundational verse for us in this series. So we have known and believed that the love that God has for us. God is love. And those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. And we've got to understand it. Where does love come from? It comes from God. God is love. That's why we have this. That's why we're designed because he has designed us to be in that. And then we got a verse like Romans chapter 12, verse 15. It says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And if I'm trying to figure out how to love the people around me, and I'm trying to figure out how to be a loving person, because this is what God's called me to be, and this is what he's designed me to be. Part of this is I have to know how to rejoice with those who rejoice and have to mourn with those who mourn. And I can't think of very many days that describe this verse, mourn with the mourn and rejoice with those that are rejoicing, more than Mother's Day. Mother's Day is a complicated day. There are a lot of ladies who will not come to church today. They specifically will not come to church today because it's such a hard day. It's hard because they may have lost a child. It's hard because they may have a rebellious child that's turned and left as an adult and has nothing to do with them or has nothing to do with the faith that they've so faithfully tried to instill in them. There's a lot of ladies who want more than anything to be a mom. And for whatever reason, they're not. And so it's a really hard day. And there's a lot of people that are mourning. But it's also a wonderfully rejoiceful day. It's a day when so many people are excited about the day. It's a happy day. It's a fun day. It's like, man, look at all the things that I have because the family is there. And some of you are at that point in your life where you've got like the 6-year-old and the 8-year-old and everything is great and everything's wonderful. And so just hold on that. Don't blink because they're going to be 16 and 18 before you know it. And then what people are telling me, hey, they're going to be 28 and 26 before you know it. And so there's all kind of joy in Mother's Day. And so many people are rejoicing, but yet so many people are mourning. And you have that wrapped up in the day. And then you got some moms who are mourning and rejoicing. They're rejoicing at one aspect of motherhood and they're mourning at another. So it's a complicated day. And the Apostle Paul tells us in Romans, says to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. We're going to add a verse this morning, Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. Here Paul says, bear one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Bear one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. So how do I do that? I mean, we've looked at some whats, and we've looked at some whys. So the what is there's love, and we're created for love, and that's the what. And we know some whys. God is love, so this is what we're supposed to be about. This is what we should be known for. When Jesus says, listen, hey, this is how the world is going to know that you are my disciples, is the love you have for one another, not the knowledge you have for one another, not the condemnation that you have for one another, not the make everybody follow the rules for, that's how the world, no, the world's going to know that you are my apostles, that you are my disciples, that the love that you have for one another. So how do we do this? So the how becomes really important. And so in this series, Designed for Love, we're looking at some really practical stuff. And might I just remind you as we talk about this practical stuff, you don't know it if you're not doing it. Okay? So if you walk away from a day like today and go, well, I knew all of that. That is not the question. The question is how well are you practicing it? How well are you putting it into practice and what it is that as we go about how we're trying to live our life. So how do I rejoice with those that rejoice? And how do I mourn with those who mourn? How do I bear someone else's burden? Now, we don't have the time, but if I were to pass the microphone around the room and we all just started listing our burdens, we would all leave this place today really depressed. Okay? Because there's a lot of burdens in the room. There's family burdens, and there's work burdens, and there's health burdens, and there's relationship burdens, and it's just the burdens. It's just a burden. Everything's a burden. The San Jose Sharks keep winning. That's a burden. And so how do we how do we deal with that? It doesn't say ignore the burdens. It says to help each other bear the burdens. So we're going to talk about today about 6 ways to help do that. And we're going to talk about 6 things that sensitive people do. Now, let's talk about the word sensitive before we get to those 6 things, okay? Because some of you are very sensitive about the word sensitive. And when you hear sensitive, you think weak, pansy, whatever, okay? That's not what we're going to talk about. I'm also talking about sensitive as in we need to make sure that we're going to spend our life walking around on eggshells not to offend anybody. That's not what we're talking about either, okay? When I look at the life of Jesus, when I read how he lived his life, would you say that Jesus was a sensitive person? Absolutely. Maybe the most sensitive person to ever live. So if we're called to be like Christ, and what Christian means is little Christ, then I have to figure out how to be sensitive. So Jesus was a sensitive man, and he was sensitive to the things around him while he himself was unoffendable. And man, that is a great place to get. Where I can be a loving person, I can be a sensitive person, but at the same time, I'm going to be unoffendable. I mean, that's a good place to be. So sensitive, let's define it. When you go to dictionary.com and you look it up, here's the first definition for the word sensitive. It says, quick to detect or respond to slight changes, signals, or influences. That's a pretty good definition. Y'all want to know the first thing that I thought of when I read that definition? Great quarterbacks. Great quarterbacks are that. They're quick to detect, to respond to slight changes, signals, or influences. And then I started thinking about it. Wait a minute, great communicators do that. Great business guys do that. Great doctors do that. Great moms do that. Wait a minute, great people do this. Great people, so they must be sensitive. I mean, this is the number one definition for the word sensitive. Someone that's quick to detect, respond to slight changes, signals, or influences. Here's the second definition. Of a person or person's behavior having or displaying a quick and delicate appreciation of others' feelings. Now, this is where it gets a little mushy. Okay, this is where it gets a little, I don't know. So let me make sure that you understand before I talk about these 6 things of what I'm not talking about. We are called to love people. It's the center of what Christianity is about. But I am also called to the truth. So I cannot ignore the truth under the false pretense that I'm loving. Okay? Now, the world is getting this messed up. Culture is getting this messed up. There's a difference between being sensitive and the difference between ignoring the truth. So a couple of things. This is not in your notes. Maybe you want to write this in the margins. I've talked about this before. I'm going to keep saying it. I'm going to keep pounding it because I got to get it, okay? Because I struggle with this one sometimes. Unclear is unkind. When I am unclear, I am not being kind. And so I've got to know what I believe. I got to know what I'm about. I got to know what I'm trying to do. I got to have my goals. I got to figure out what it is. Unclear is unkind. The second one is this. Hiding the truth to protect someone's feelings is not love. Hiding the truth to protect someone's feelings is not loving. And there's all kinds of ways we hide the truth. We hide the truth by ignoring it. We hide the truth by just hiding it under something. We hide the truth by not even wanting to know the truth, by not even going there. Hiding the truth is not loving. So that is not, a sensitive person is not a person who hides the truth. A sensitive person is someone who knows the truth, who's pursuing the truth, and then is going to try to figure out, how do I communicate to this person so that they know that I am loving them? So being unclear is unkind, and hiding the truth to protect someone's feelings is not loving. I think about this story in the life of Jesus. It's found in John chapter 8, where Jesus has the Pharisees, the guys who are keeping all the rules and making sure everybody else keeps all the rules. They are the police from the religious rule-keeping thing, and they bring to Jesus, because Jesus is preaching this message. And the message that Jesus is preaching is different than anything anybody ever heard before. And he's preaching a message of grace, and he's preaching a message of love. And so they catch this woman who's literally caught in the act of adultery, and they bring the woman. Now, they don't bring the guy. That's a different story. We'll talk about that another time. But they bring the woman to Jesus. And it's a trick question. We've caught her in adultery. So what are you going to do? But see, the law said this. The law said that she's supposed to be stoned. She's supposed to be executed. And they had the full right to be able to execute this woman because of what she had done. And so they literally are standing there with rocks in their hands. They're ready to throw the rocks to kill this woman. And Jesus starts writing some stuff in the dirt. We don't know what he wrote in the dirt. Some theologians say that what he really got their attention, he wasn't on dirt. He was actually writing on the stone floor of the temple. So he's actually writing in the concrete. And that's what made them drop their stones. Something made them drop their stones. And they left. And then he looks at the woman and he asks her a question, because God is always going to be asking you a question, because he wants you to enter into a dialogue with him. And he wants to know if anybody's condemned her. And she says, no. And he says, neither do I. But go and sin no more. He didn't say, I don't condemn you. Bless your heart. You just keep doing what you're doing. It's okay not to be okay. You just hang in there. You just keep doing whatever you're doing to fill your little bucket. You'll be fine. He didn't say that. What did he say? I don't condemn you. That's sensitive. Go and sin no more. That's sensitive. So now that we got a little bit of a basis of what I want to talk about this morning as we talk about these 6 things, and they're going to be simple and practical. Book that we're reading this month by John Ortberg called "I'd Like You More If You Were More Like Me." He talks about a couple of these, and then I've added a couple. The first thing, these 6 things sensitive people do. And if you're hung up on the word sensitive, just change it to loving. 6 things loving people do. Hey, if you're macho and you need to change it to warrior, just change it to warrior. 6 things warriors do. Okay, whatever it is you got to do, all right, to get there. But here is the stuff that, the first one, sensitive people listen. I heard a great sermon last week on listening. And that's what we talked about last week. If you weren't here last week, go watch it. It's on our webpage. We record. We're having live stream. We live stream this service every week. We've been doing that for a couple of weeks. So everybody say hi, everybody. Hi. So there's people who are watching. So hi, wherever in the world you might be watching live stream. But we also record it so you can go back and watch it. I preach the message 3 times. I preach at 8, 9:30, and 11. And most weeks I go back and watch it so that I can hear what I said, and I can try to apply what I'm saying and to really listen. Sensitive people listen. So if you struggle with listening, go back and watch that sermon. Listen to those things. And remember, you don't know it if you're not practicing it. You don't know it if you're not practicing it. So make sure that you have that so that you know what's going on there. I put this joke up at 8 o'clock. It fell flat. So see if y'all think it's funny. Somebody sent me this after the listening service sermon last week. So my wife just stopped and said, "You weren't even listening, were you?" I thought, that's a pretty weird way to start a conversation. See, I thought that's kind of funny. Maybe it's too personal. And that made my wife laugh, as I just heard her. Sensitive people listen. All right, so enough about that. You can go back and watch that and see about that. Second thing, sensitive people show up. If you're a sensitive people, you show up. A sensitive person, you show up. You show up when stuff is happening. You show up when someone is mourning. You show up when somebody's rejoicing. If they're rejoicing, bring the party hat. Bring the, hey, we got food, we got drink. We're gonna have let's rejoice. You show up. You show up to the party. You show up when there's mourning. You show up when things are not right. You show up when people are struggling. Sensitive people show up. So if we're gonna be sensitive, we got to learn how to be present. We got to learn how to be fully engaged what is going on. There's a story in the Bible. It's in the book called of Job. If you're not really familiar with the Bible, sometimes people look at it and think it's Job, but it's Job. And in this story, the Job is this man who's a very faithful man, a very loving relationship with God. And through this whole conversation, which is a whole nother deal. But anyway, all this, he loses everything. He loses all of his children. He loses all of his wealth. He even loses his health. And he's got some friends that show up. And I think it's for a week. These friends show up and don't say a word. And that's when they did their best work. They did their best work when they showed up and were just present with Job in his mourning. It started going sideways when they started talking. When they started trying to communicate is when it went sideways. So we've got to learn, if I'm going to be a sensitive person, man, sometimes the thing I just got to do is show up. I just got to be engaged. I got to be in it. I got to learn how to walk in when everybody else is walking out. Let's all mourn with Mitzi because she didn't turn her phone off. We got to learn how to walk in when everybody else is walking out. Now, it's hard to walk in when everybody else is walking out, right? It's hard because I don't know what to say. Great, don't say anything. Just walk in. Just sit. Just hug. Just be there. And that's what sensitive people do. Sensitive people show up. So we got to learn how to do that. So I got to know how to listen. And by the way, I can't listen if I don't show up. Right? I got to show up to listen. Third thing that sensitive people do is this. Is sensitive people learn not to compare. Sensitive people learn how not to compare. Now, you compare and I compare. We do it all the time. We compare up, we compare down, we compare sideways. We compare all the time. And I love the way the word learn is in here. Sensitive people learn not to compare. Because you didn't have to learn how to compare. You're going to have to learn how not to compare. And so when I am trying to help someone, I'm trying to rejoice with them, I'm trying to weep with them. By the way, you won't be able to rejoice with someone if you're comparing. Well, why didn't I get the promotion? Why didn't I get the new car? Why didn't my team win the championship? Why? When I start comparing, I'm not going to be able to rejoice. And when I'm trying to help someone that's mourning, don't do the comparison thing. Don't say things like, well, that's no big deal. That would be really insensitive, wouldn't it? But man, we're guilty of this. You'll hear somebody and they're mourning. And in your mind, it's not something worth mourning. You're going, well, this isn't a big deal. Well, there's a whole lot of things in where, there's starving people in Africa. Okay, that's true. And I have a splinter in my finger and it hurts. Okay? Both of those are true. Do you understand what I'm saying? So you got to be careful when we compare, because when I come in and start trying to carry somebody's burden, I'm trying to love them, I'm trying to help them, and all I'm going, well, you got all of this stuff that's going great, and you got this one thing that's not going great, you should get over it. That doesn't sound very sensitive, does it? That doesn't sound very loving, because it's not. Sensitive people learn not to compare. So my story is my story and my pain is my pain. So make sure that you deal with the pain. Don't try to ignore the pain. Don't try to say the pain doesn't count because it's not painful enough, or it's not pain compared to somebody else's pain. Don't do that. I do that. I hear that all the time from people. Oh, well, I know this isn't a big deal. I know there's people who are worse off than I am. How many times have you ever thought or said, I know there are people worse off than I am? You do it all the time. I know you do. We do it all the time. Stop it. We got to stop doing that, because we need to deal with what it is that we have to be dealing with. And until I face that pain, it's not. I love this. I got it from Elise Peterson and reminded her last week. She doesn't know where she got it from, so we'll give credit to whoever it was. But anyway, if you're going to compare to Eden. If you're going to compare where you're at in your life, compare it to Eden. Before the fall. Now that pain becomes real pain. Don't compare it to the worst person in the room. Don't compare it to the worst story in the room. Don't do that. Compare it to Eden. Sensitive people learn not to compare. Now, on this, let me speak to those. Let me just take a moment and speak to the drama queens and kings in the room, because there are a few of you in the room. So I don't want to say this in a loving, sensitive way to the drama queens and kings in the room, okay? Sometimes you have to grow up, okay? Sometimes you just got to grow up. Sometimes we got to learn how to be a bridge builder so we can get over it, okay? And that's just what we got to do. And so we can't hide from the truth. And if you fall into the trap of having super thin skin and everything is a crisis, you're going to have a hard time finding anybody to listen to you, because everything is a crisis. And nobody wants to be around somebody who's always in crisis. So we got to make sure that we balance those two things out. The fourth one, sensitive people do practical things. Sensitive people do practical things. Helpful people, we talked about this last week. Helpful people ask, how can I help? Helpful people ask, how can I help? But now you got to make sure that you get this. Helpful people ask, how can I help, after they've listened to the story, after they've listened to the situation, after they have shown up, after they have engaged. Then when you ask, how can I help, that can be helpful. But if you just go up to somebody who's mourning and you say, how can I help, that may not be helpful at all. Because that person just needs to know, just needs to feel understood. So when you ask, how can I help, make sure a relationship's there. Make sure that you've been listening. Make sure that you're engaged in it, okay? And if you haven't been, then you just do this. You just do practical things. You just do. Helpful people just do. And you just, an easy way to think is, if I was in that situation, what would I want somebody to do? If I was in that situation, what would I want my friend to do for me? Then just do that. Take them a meal. Maybe they're celebrating something in their life and you want to rejoice with them, and you just give them a gift card to a restaurant and say, hey, I know this is really going well in your life. Why don't you and your friend or you and your family go and celebrate what's going on in your life? I just want to be a part of it. That's a practical thing. Sensitive people do practical things. So we listen, sensitive person listens, or the warrior listens. The warrior shows up. The warrior learns not to compare, and the warrior does practical things. And then sensitive people, the fifth one, sensitive people do not try to comfort prematurely. Sensitive people do not try to comfort prematurely. You have to deal with your pain. And if you've got people in your life who won't let you deal with the pain and they won't let you mourn, then that's a problem. Again, I try to pay attention to the things that I find myself saying to people as I try to pastor people. And here's something that I say to people all the time. Don't forget to mourn. Don't forget to mourn. And sometimes it's a death, and we need to mourn. And you can have a funeral and not mourn. Sometimes it's a move, and you need to mourn. Sometimes a relationship ends, and you got to mourn. So don't be afraid to mourn. Don't be afraid to reach out to people by just showing up and not trying to fix it. Sensitive people don't try to comfort prematurely. So be careful when you try to make it better. Be careful when you run to make it better. Moms, can I say something to you on Mom's Day? Sometimes the best thing you can do for your child is let them fail. Because that's where they're going to learn. And I know it goes against every fiber in your being. Because you want to run in and rescue. And you want to run in and make it just like the way that you would do it. And you are not helping. So sometimes we got to make sure that we don't run in there and comfort prematurely. Don't try to answer every question. Oh, let me tell you why this is so. No, don't tell people how to feel. Don't try to answer every question. You know, people say some really hateful things at funerals. They do. Things like, well, heaven needed them more than you did. What an insensitive, ridiculous, dumb thing to say. Oh, Jesus knew you could handle it. What? No. Don't try to answer stuff. Don't try to come up with the reason, that kind of, just show up. But sensitive people don't do that. Sensitive people don't try to comfort prematurely. The last one is this. Sensitive people look for moments of gratitude. Sensitive people look for moments of gratitude. Now, this one can get a little tricky because we've talked about how we're not supposed to compare. Okay, so we got to make sure that we don't compare as we go through this process. But there comes a point when you have to look at gratitude. And a sensitive person will help a person see the things that they can be thankful for. Now, if it's a time of rejoicing, that's easy. But if it's a time of mourning, things are not well, this is a bad place. Deep into the conversation. Deep into the relationship. Hey, well, let's look at some stuff that we can rejoice in. Even in the midst of the storm, here's some things that we can be grateful for. Now, you can't start off with that. That's insensitive. But as it goes, getting to that point to be able to say, hey, let's think about some things to be grateful for. Yeah, this is really tough. You're having a really struggle maybe with your adult children or with a relationship or work. Let's say you're having an unbelievable struggle at work. And then be grateful for your family. Maybe you're really struggling at home and work is great. Be thankful for work. Be thankful for that part of your life going well, looking for the gratitude. Here's something to try to practice for those of us that drive. It's not about driving. Maybe it'll help. As you drive home, whether it's for lunch, at the end of your day, whenever you drive home, try to practice this. Come up with 3 things you're grateful for. So moms, maybe you dropped your kids off at school, and as you're going back home, be thankful. List off 3 things you're grateful for instead of stewing about how long it took them to get in the car that morning. When you're coming home from work, just think about, hey, I'm gonna think about 3 things that I can be grateful for, because sensitive people look for moments of gratitude. And I begin to look for moments of gratitude in my own life. It's going to be easier for me to help people find it in theirs. You're designed for love. You're designed to love, and you're designed to receive love. That's the way God has made us. And it's the foundation of Christianity, is for us to be loving people. And we're going to have to learn how to do it because we're wonderfully complex. And we've got a lot of messed up definitions for love. And so there's some things that we're going to have to practice, and there's some things that we're going to have to work on, and learning how to listen and practicing how to listen, like we talked about last week, is so important. As we talked about today, I'm going to try to be a warrior, and warriors are sensitive. And moms are sensitive, and dads are sensitive, and brothers and sisters are sensitive, and bosses are sensitive, employees are sensitive. And we got to learn how to do that, and it's just not going to happen. So we have to work at it. And the scripture tells us to bear one another's burdens. Okay? So how do we do that? So my challenge to you this morning is you will think about hopefully something in here that jumps out at you. Maybe the 3 things as you drive home, or maybe you need to work on being a drama king or queen, or maybe you need to just practice showing up and just being present. But pick something and begin to work on that, to realize that if I'm going to help the people around me, then I'm going to have to be a sensitive person. So let's pray. Father God, we thank you for today. We thank you for who you are. Thank you for the fact that you love us far more than we'll ever imagine. And Jesus, oh my goodness, how sensitive you are with us. You're so loving. And your love is so prevalent and around us. So, Father, help us not to be guilty of a swimming fish looking for water. Help us not to be trying to look for your love. Let us see all of the love and all of its fullness and abundance that is around us. And Father, we know that when we begin to know your love and experience your love, then we'll be able to give it back to you and to the people that you've placed in our lives. So we ask that you'd help us to do that. And may we bear one another's burdens, because it is your law. In your name we pray. Amen.